It's getting late, we should take the fast road. I thought and turned left, trying desperately to see the road in the pitch darkness through the wall of rain. I had never traveled this way before, even though it was much shorter than the main road. The thing was, every time I left my grandmother's house, she told me not to take this road and didn't explain why. So far I had obeyed, but now that requirement was broken. I felt uneasy, but I forced myself to pull myself together. After 20 minutes of driving, the village was still nowhere to be seen, although I had estimated that I should have arrived 10 minutes ago. There were no houses, no people, just a black abyss ahead. The light from the headlights cut through the darkness for no more than a few yards. Worried, I took the navigator out of my bag and looked where I was. It turned out that the village was still about 2 miles away. With the firm intention of checking the speedometer to see if it was in working order when I got home, I drove on. But even after 10 minutes the picture in the window had not changed. A black shroud behind the rain, and nothing but them. I pulled out the navigator again, since I thought I was lost. But when I looked at it, I was horrified. The navigator showed that I hadn't moved a yard, and the village was still about 2 miles away. I thought that the device was broken, but after turning it in my hands, I realized that it was in good working order and showed the right direction. Fear crept into my soul. I remembered my grandmother's warning not to take shortcuts. But I decided not to stop and to get out of this strange place by all means. I'd been driving for about an hour. The navigator was stubbornly at 2.01 miles to destination and wouldn't budge. It was getting cold, and the rain had turned to a downpour. From surprise, I braked hard and hit my head on the steering wheel. "You're crazy," I shouted angrily and jumped out of the car. However, after walking a few steps, I realized that there was no one in front of the car, although a couple of seconds ago I definitely saw that I had almost hit a group of people running across the road. After standing like that for a minute, I finally realized I was hallucinating and ran to the car. I kept driving forward, trying not to look in my mirrors. An hour and a half after turning at the fork, I began to realize that all this was pointless. The point on the navigator continued to stand still, and there was no sign of the village outside the window. Light from windows, lanterns, people, houses, buildings. I stubbornly kept driving into the abyss of darkness, gradually losing hope of getting out of here. There was still half an hour's gas left. What would happen when it ran out, I was afraid to imagine. I drove and drove and drove and drove. Suddenly I saw some movement in the rearview mirror. I took a closer look. They were the people I had almost hit. At first I wanted to stop and hit the brake pedal, but suddenly I was stunned. How could it be that a car was going 40 miles per hour, and people were running and catching up to it? As I looked closer, I saw that they weren't running at all. They were gliding over the ground. Scared to death, I stepped on the gas, wanting only one thing: to get away from my pursuers. I looked in the mirror. They were almost upon me, a few yards away from hitting the car, and that didn't bode well. 50 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour. I looked back, but they were gone. Phew, I exhaled with relief. They're behind me. And more good news. The dot on my navigator had finally shifted and was now showing 1.5 miles to my destination. I looked ahead. In the distance I could see the small dot from our flashlight on the gate. The darkness receded, and in a few minutes I was at my grandmother's house. I still wonder what happened that night. What was it? Had I fallen into some kind of space-time hole? What were those creatures gliding over the ground? And why did they want to catch up with me? The answer remained there, on the fast track.